Hail and well met, traveler. Welcome again to Threat Dice, a podcast about tabletop role-playing games, storytelling, and the vagaries of the dice. I'm your host, Kylen Wiggin. I am 1/3 of the team at Tumbledye Games, a young company developing a new hybrid storytelling RPG called Trove. We believe in the power of story, and the goal of Trove is to empower both players and game masters to level up the action, drama, and believability in their tabletop games. You can find out more at www.tumbledye.com or follow us on Facebook, Twitter @Tumbledye, or Instagram. However, this pod is not just about our game. We love tabletop RPGs, all kinds, and we'd like to share with you some ideas from our own experience, both as players and game masters, that might help you take your games to new heights. Today, we're going to go into depth about Session 0, continuing our discussion from last week. Once again, I'll be joined by my co-creators of Trove, Kevin Berenger and Andy Fling. We'll discuss actual Session Zeros that we have run as part of our Trove playtesting in the last few weeks. What went right, what went wrong, and what we're going to do better next time. Welcome back again to Threat Dice. I'm joined tonight by my co-creators of Trove, Andy Fling.
Hello.
And Kevin Berenger.
Hello.
Thank you both for being here with me again. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Last time we talked, we discussed the process of Session 0 and how to build a new session out of nothing. And tonight what I'd like to talk about is actually discuss real-world scenarios. In the last few weeks, we have all been doing playtesting of our new game, Trove. And to that end, we have all done Session Zeros for groups that we are either familiar with or not. And I think in both your cases, they were with brand new people that you'd never gamed with before. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yes.
That's pretty cool. And a very exciting new thing for us. So we've talked a little bit about these before, of course, but I think it would be really informative for the people who listened to the first episode to get an idea of what all that we talked about means in real life. So let's go ahead and dive in. Andy, I want to talk about the insect and the baker, because I really feel like this was a heck of a session. So Can you give us a little overview of what happened?
Sure. My playtesters, it was a man and a woman who they're in a relationship, and I met them through my housemate. They introduced me to the board game Scythe, which I am now absolutely addicted to. And when we went over to play the game with them, I noticed their bookshelf, which is just packed full of RPGs. And through the course of the night, I learned that, they play all the time. They play all kinds of different games. I thought they would be perfect candidates, so I approached them later and said, would you like to play test our game? And so they came over, and we had our Session 0. And what I had done for preparation was to just make this, it was a play test. They understood that it was more about taking a look at the game, seeing where the weak spots are, trying to break it, so on and so forth. So I just came up with a very generic fantasy concept for the campaign, for the adventure. The orcs are coming to attack, and the heroes have to go to the forest to talk to the wizard about the special thing and whatever. So I had that already. And then in Session 0, where they started creating their characters, it quickly became clear that that scenario was absolutely not going to work. And like true to form, asking them to come over and break my game, they started in character creation. So Alex, he actually, this is our fault because it's in the rules, it's in the book. One of the suggestions for character creation is, hey, if you wanted, you could make a sentient insect. So he did, and he got really creative with it. How the insect is living in this village with humans, and he has a trench coat and thinks that he is completely fooling all of them to think that he is also a human.
Just totally passing as a human.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a bug in a trench coat, just totally passing.
Yes. And what's actually happening is everybody just accepts his presence and knows exactly who and what he is. Except for his best friend, Courtney. She made a 16-year-old girl who loves to bake. As a character.
That's an imposing character.
Yes. That suggestion is not in the book, so she just came up with that for the hell of it. So she's the only one who is fooled by his disguise. Despite the fact that she spends more time with him than anybody else. And so after character creation, I was like, we're going to stop here. We have time to start the game, but the scenario I've come up with is absolutely inadequate to your creativity. So I said, give me a week or so, and we'll come back next session and we'll start the game with a whole new scenario. So I came up with the idea that in their village there is a baking contest, and the winner goes to the main city that is close to this congregation of towns and hamlets. And the mayor of that city does a taste test of all the winners, and whoever wins that secondary contest gets to take their confection and go to the capital and serve the king and queen. And so this year, Courtney's family won the contest and went to the main city of Downsmouth. And the mayor was going down the line, taste testing. He's this big, robust, loud, mustachioed character.
Of course.
So the mayor gets to Courtney's family's, what was it? It was like some kind of fruit bread or something. He tastes it and he's like, oh, this is very good, very excellent. He starts to choke. It turns out that their fruit bread is poisoned, but they didn't poison it. So they don't know. They don't know. Someone was trying to use them to assassinate the mayor. And so that's where I started the adventure.
That is an amazing story of adapting to what your players give you.
Yeah.
And being totally blindsided by the creativity of players, and instead of shutting them down, saying, wait, let's make this work. And that's really why I wanted to touch on that one. So before we get into all the big questions, Kevin, why don't you give us an overview of the Session Zero from the group affectionately known as the Murderhobos?
Accurately known as the Murderhobos. Yeah, well, first, hey, Andy, I want to comment on how I'm just thrilled that you were able to come up with a scenario where Rainbow Bright meets CSU. Like, I can't think of another game where that could work. Yeah. So that's exciting. So yeah. So I guess actually I'm going to start with an anecdote about a more recent experience that I had. Reconnected with an old friend who is a fantastic GM and invited me to an online session, and I met, a bunch of new people, and we were playing a very, very well-known role-playing game, and and it was great. We all sort of jumped in. Everybody was really cool, really friendly, and we all had a good time. The characters started off with a pirate background, a piratical background. So we were all, criminal sort of minded characters and that sort of thing. But we dove in, and not too long into the session, there was a straight up murder. It's not, some of the players decided my character would just straight out murder these dwarves for no reason. It was kind of a random encounter on the highway. Bunch of dwarves shipping some food or something in a wagon, and there was an altercation, a verbal altercation, and it turned into a slaughter. And I realized I wasn't really into that. Rewind a few weeks back, I was doing a Session Zero for a group that I was going to be the narrator, the GM for. This was a group of people who had recently started playing this popular role-playing game and had a really good time, created cool characters, and some they're very imaginative, creative people, but they were really having a good time with the escapism of the game, where it's sort of morally devoid of consequences.
Sure, that's actually a really important topic.
Yep, and that's something that a lot of players really enjoy, and escapism is one of the reasons that we play these games sometimes.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for inhabiting a world where morality is much simpler than the one in the real world.
Right. I mean, there are tons of video games that provide exactly that release. So, they were telling me stories about how they'd played that way in the past, and I was like, okay, that's great. But we're going to do a session 0, and we're going to talk about what kind of game we're going to play and what kind of characters you really want to have. And then we're going to talk about how those characters are interconnected and know each other and what their connections to the world are. Right? And this is sort of part of the character building process, but also the group building process and how we were going to get to know each other. So we did that. We did a session 0, and what happened kind of blew my mind, because we were making lots of jokes like, okay, we're going to get together with the Murderhobos and we're going to see how this goes. And what came out of it was the players wound up creating characters that they were invested in, not just in terms of their powers or their abilities and what they could gain by playing the game. They were invested in these characters by their backstory that they created for them, and also how they were connected to each other. And one of them created a really interesting character with fire control powers, like these really amazing, sort of like a Human Torch kind of character. He himself doesn't burst into flame, but he can control fire. And that was the vision that he had, and that's the character we created, except it's a teenage boy. So he's very young. So that's an angle on his character. And he starts off with this tragedy, where on the island that he grew up on, in this sort of a primitive island culture, they were attacked by these mercenaries. And he, completely on his own, this is the backstory he came up with, his powers manifested to protect his people from these mercenaries, but he lost control of them, and he wound up destroying his own people too. And he's the last survivor of
That's a really solid, mutant X-Men backstory. Ooh.
Very much. Yes. Like this epic, tragic tale. And so he started off with that. Another character, she decided that her character she sort of started off wanting to play a sorceress, a magic user. It was sort of this. We decided that this was going to be a traditional sword and sorcery type of setting, because that's what they were already familiar with.
Okay.
From their other game. So she decided her sorceress character was going to be somebody who was very highly educated and sort of like a James Bond kind of character. Like she was really good at lots of stuff, really socially savvy and that sort of thing. So she also really just took some time to make this a three-dimensional kind of character. She also then decided that she had visited the island that the boy grew up on years before. Not too many years before, because she had met him.
Ah.
And so they actually knew each other, because she's, I guess, more of an Indiana Jones type. Like she's an adventurer, traveler, knowledge seeker kind of character. So that was that connection. Then another character who decided he was going to be he's basically the captain of the city guard in the city. And so now we have a city.
Right, and now suddenly there was a city.
Right. And he's the captain of the guard, and, he's sort of a grizzled, he's kind of young, but I think he sort of was a Sherlock Holmes-y kind of character. He's like an inspector, the lead inspector. But he walks with a limp, and he uses a cane.
Ah. So Sherlock Holmes and House.
Exactly. Yes! I
Pretty
didn't
much, yeah.
even make that connection with House. You're totally spot on. It totally escaped me, so thank you for that. So he's pulling in these tropes and, concepts from different things. And, he may have come up with that spontaneously too. But
yeah, it's possible.
yeah, and he had, but it's a cane sword, of course.
Of course. I mean,
of course.
And he's an expert fencer, even though he walks with a limp. And so those are three of the characters. The final character is a guy who decided he was going to play a female character, which I always applaud because it's a brave choice, if it's playing, against your own type sometimes.
Yeah, crossplay is something I try to encourage as well.
Yeah. And so he made this bold decision out of the gate, but he didn't have a lot of ideas about powers. So, it's kind of similar to Andy's story. He decided that his character, she is a weaver.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay.
But he decided that he was going to take the opportunity to leave openings in the character to fill in later.
Good.
Ah.
That's good.
The enigma.
Exactly.
The enigma.
So that wound up becoming a really cool part, actually, of the whole scene. So he was going to sort of play her as a not a femme fatale, but sort of a dame in trouble from the old noir detective movies.
Sure.
Coming into Bogey's office and just being like, oh, please help me. And we started off with the boy. He had hidden away on one of the remaining mercenary ships. And when it was close enough to a shore, he jumps off, he swims to shore. And then he turns around and he uses his power to destroy the ship from afar.
Awesome.
That was just narrative. We just let that that was just exposition. And it was his exposition, though. He's the one who told that story. And I was like,
good.
Yes, that's exactly what happens. He swims to shore, climbs into the back of a cart going down the road, and finds himself in the city. He doesn't speak the language. He is wet and exhausted and homeless, and so he finds his way in through the back door of a tavern. Of course. And so he gets in, and we then decide, okay, within this tavern is the sorceress. And she spots you, and she recognizes you. And then we cut to the Weaver. She's entering the office of the inspector, which is on the second floor of this tavern. He lives in a tavern. He lives above a bar, just like Bogey would.
Of course.
Sam Spade would. So she comes in and she's imploring him to help her find a long-lost love. And they're having this conversation, which gives me, the narrator, the opportunity to say, here's the thing that happens that all of you experience because you're all basically in the same place. And
right.
So
you're able to convert character creation for these relatively new gamers straight into prologue, basically.
Exactly. And because of that, they're not interested in tramping through the world and slaughtering things willy-nilly because they've created these characters that they empathize with. And as soon as you have empathy, if you have this empathy, it makes it harder to, run your character as though there are no consequences. And it gives the narrator so much more to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So they're champing at the bit for the next session.
That's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that. So let's do a little post-mortem, if you will, on each of these sessions. So, Andy.
Yeah.
Based on what we know about your session, what do you feel was the thing that went most right?
I think what I'm learning, and this might be, I don't think it's a general statement for all game masters. I think it's a preference maybe, but I think it's something that everyone should at least try, is that less is more. I'm finding that less is more, and what I mean by less is less prep. If you go into session 0, it has to involve a group of players who are willing to do it this way. If you have a group of players like we talked about in episode 0, who want a story told to them, who go in wanting the world to be there for them to walk through, already made, then this might not be the best if you have players like I did who are ready, they have the experience they need to understand how these games work, I would say go to session 0 without a plan and have character creation be also an act of world building, where your idea for session 1 comes from what your players create. The world that they create around their characters, you can extrapolate and create session 1 with. I feel like that is what went right, is my I don't want to call it a mistake. I mean, I wanted to be prepared, so I had the scenario that I had. But I am glad that Courtney and Alex went the direction they went, because it gave me an opportunity to customize the adventure in a way that would truly connect to their characters, connect their characters to each other, and just make it more fun for everybody involved. And it was a challenge for me that I really enjoyed. So I think what went right is what went wrong. I didn't need to prepare because they took care of that. It was unfortunate that we couldn't get a game going immediately, but I think that's a sacrifice that's worth making.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, Kev, what are you most proud of from that session?
Well, I not that I can really take credit for it, but converting Murderhobos is, a way to go through life, I think.
I think so. I totally agree.
Every time I meet her murder hobo, I buy them a sandwich and try to, change their mind. But so far I'm 0 for 2. But no, it was fun because I think, I feel very proud that, some of these players hadn't had a ton of RPG experience, and they, I think they had a great time, and they sort of saw it in a certain way. And I am very happy that I broadened that point of view a little bit. I think for some of them, I'm proud of myself because I did overcome some challenges that they threw my way. They had some concepts that were broad, and I tried very hard not to push back or put up any kind of roadblocks. So we discussed things and there were very few, but we discussed things that we thought might make unnecessary challenges and try to make them more specific and tease in some details so that they're not as broad-based necessarily. But also having players with different styles in terms of how they wanted to create these characters, considering they have carte blanche to do whatever they want. And the fact that we ended up with the variety that we did and made it gel. I feel like, and it's definitely not just me. It's the way these players chose to do it and to play along, but also contribute their own parts of the story and provide all of these hooks and threads that later on they envision turning into more. So we turned Murderhobos into storytellers, I guess.
A most fine accomplishment indeed.
Yes.
I think that is about all the time we have for the evening, so I'd like to thank you both once again for joining me. I hope that this was enlightening for the folks following along. Thank you both, and we'll look forward to talking with you again in a future installment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kylen.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, folks. Andy from Tumbledye here to give a shout out to a friend of the dice. If you are in the Seattle area and need a damn good cup of coffee, snack, and excellent service, you need to head over to Distant Worlds Coffee House. Besides being my favorite cafe, they are Seattle's gathering grounds for geeks with a library of games, books, and comics to satisfy just about any fandom. Every time I go, I see folks playing RPGs, board games, real-time strategy on their laptops. It's just a great place to go and hang out. At the time of this recording, it is unfortunately the middle of the corona pandemic, so tables are not available right now. However, they are open for pickup and there are spots to sit outside the cafe. So please, check out Distant Worlds Coffee House at 6417 Roosevelt Way Northeast, Suite 104 in Seattle, or find them on Facebook and at distantworldscoffee.com.
Next time on Threat Dice, I'll discuss some aspects of fighting and combat in our RPGs. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm looking forward to really digging in, and hopefully illustrating a bit of the philosophy around combat encounters that I've built over the last 20 years as a game master. Until we meet again, may the road ever rise to meet you. Threat Dice is a production of Tumble Die Games, LLC. Our intro music is What Lies Beyond by Vince Vept, and the outro music is Storm, also by Vince Vept. Check out his amazing work at youtube.com/VinceVept. That's VINDSVEPT. This episode was produced and recorded by me, Kylen Wiggin. Never laugh at live dragons. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.